Assalamu alaikum students. Today we will learn about the next unit of political science for the class 7th, that is institutional representation of democracy. As we know that democracy is that form of government which is by the people, for the people and of the people. It's all about the people, which makes democracy a strong government. Democracy gives the power to the people to elect their representatives. First of all, we will see two terms, as indirect democracy and direct democracy. We have discussed these points earlier, but still we will remind them. Indirect democracy or representative democracy is when citizens elect representatives to make laws for them. In indirect democracy, the power lies with the people. In direct democracy also the power lies with the people, but in indirect democracy they choose their representatives who will make the laws for the people indirectly. They choose the representatives and they go into the legislatures or in the parliament and make laws for the people. That is indirect democracy. But in direct democracy, it is where citizens themselves vote for or against specific proposals or laws. Some states in ancient Greece had this system. Even the Switzerland has this system, direct democracy. What does this mean? In direct democracy, the citizens itself vote for specific proposals or policies for laws. They directly participate whether the laws are good for them or not, whether the policies are good for them or not. In indirect democracy, the representatives make laws for the citizens, but in direct democracy, the citizens itself vote for the laws or the policies made by them. So now we will see the institutional representation of democracy. What does it include? Institutions are those platforms where our representatives chosen by the people represent us, make laws for us. Now we will see its introduction. The institutional representation of democracy includes universal adult franchise, it includes elections, it includes political parties and coalition government. The institutional representation of democracy, what does it include? It includes universal adult franchise, that is right to vote. It includes elections. Elections are the means where we cast vote for our representatives. Political parties are those parties which led the elections or held the different elections. And coalition government, where two or more than two political parties form the government. Now first of all is the universal adult franchise. Most modern democracies now practice universal adult franchise, which means that all the adults have the right to vote irrespective of their race, sex, religion, economic or social status. As we have already discussed at this point what is universal adult franchise, but since before this time many countries were not providing the universal adult franchise or right to vote to everyone, but because of time, because of the enlightenment, because of the development, the modern democracies, now people choose more and more, the citizens, the countries choose more and more democracies, because it gives everyone equal chance, every people equal chance of livelihood, of right to vote. So modern democracies practice universal adult franchise, which means that adults above the 18 years of age, it is in India, have the right to vote and to elect their representative irrespective of their race, sex, religion, economic or social status. Whatever their race is, whatever their color is, whatever their sex is, male, female, bisexual, whatever, religion, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, economic or social status, economic, whether rich or poor, social status, whether they are from the rich families or the poor families or the middle class, all have the universal adult franchise. Now we will see the that it includes the institutional representation of democracy, includes the universal adult franchise. Second thing, it includes the elections. Elections are the means where the voters vote for their representatives. Elections are the process by which the citizens of a democracy select or choose their representatives. Not select, it's elected their representatives. The elected representatives from different parts of the country meet in a body called the assembly or the parliament. So we can say that elections are the process where the citizens of a democracy choose their representatives who met in a parliament or in assembly and make laws for the general people. Elections have to be held at regular intervals. Some countries hold them every 5 years, while some hold them every 6 years or 4 or 6 years. Like, elections have to be held at regular intervals. Elections should be held by the time and time. Some countries like India, we have after 5 years. In USA, we have after 6 years. In another countries, they have 4 years. So the election should be at the regular intervals. It should not be after the 7, 8, 9 years or whatever, but should be at a regular interval. Now there are some types of elections. First of all is the general election. In India, elections are held once in 5 years. This is called the general elections. In India, we have the elections after 5 years. This is called a general election. Now comes the by-election. Sometimes when a member of parliament or state legislature dies in office or resigns, or elections are held in his or her constituency before the completion of 5 years. This is called a by-election. What does that by-election? As we see that general elections are those elections like in India we have after 5 years. Now by-elections are those elections if, for example, prime minister, if he dies or resigns or whatever be the reason is, if after completion of during the completion of his 5 years, if he dies or resigns from the job, then comes the participation of by-election. Then we conduct the by-elections. Mid-term elections. It, for certain reasons, the president on the advice of prime minister dissolves the Lok Sabha or a state assembly. Elections will be conducted ahead of 5 years. This is called a mid-term election. If president finds that there are certain reasons or there is something reason, then president with the advice of prime minister dissolves the Lok Sabha, or we can say suspends the work of Lok Sabha or the state assembly. State assemblies are in the states and Lok Sabha is at the center. So we can say that Lok Sabha or the state assembly can be dissolved by the president on advice of prime minister, and elections will be conducted ahead of 5 years, or we can say that it's the mid-term election. It held during the 5 years, and this is called a mid-term election. But there are some reasons, that's why president can lead to the advice of prime minister and dissolves Lok Sabha or state assembly. Then the mid-term elections are being held. Now we will see the requirements for fair elections. All these things, requirements for fair election means there are some criteria or there are some requirements or features where we have a fair election. Fair election means where there is no gambling of voters, or there is no violence or any violent act, no chaos, no confusion during the elections. Everyone is given equal chance to vote, to choose their representatives. That is a fair election, where all the voters will choose because of their choice the representatives. So all the citizens should have only one vote, and all the votes should carry the same value. That means one citizen, one vote, and it should have that value. If people have to vote, they should have choices. If people are given the right to vote, so they can choose their representative according to their choice. Now third one is election should be held regularly. Election should be held regularly, as we saw earlier that Elections should be held at regular intervals. Elections should be conducted in an atmosphere free of fear or violence. So last point we discussed that elections should be held regularly. Elections should be conducted in an atmosphere free of fear or violence. So it means that the last point means that the election should be conducted in an atmosphere of free of fear. That means there should be no fear of any political party, any party to the people, to the general people while electing, while choosing their representatives, or there should be no such type of violence which will harm the people to elect their representatives. So these are the requirements, like all the states should have only one vote and all the votes should carry the same value. That means if a rich or a poor are there, so the vote given to them should be equal value. It should not be that rich people are given more value as compared to poor. No, votes are given to the general people and every vote is equal to everyone and has the same value. If people have to vote, they should have choices. That means the people should have choices of different political parties, whether they choose BJP, Congress. At the state level they should National Conference, PDP, PC, whatever. There should be choices so that people can choose the best they found. Elections should be held at regular intervals after 5 years. Elections should be conducted in an atmosphere free of fear or violence. It should be a fair election, that people should be given free choice, good atmosphere so they can choose their representatives. This was a little bit introduction about the institutional representation of democracy. That means, if we recapitulate it, institutional representation means what are the institutions, what are the things which will represent the people, which will represent the democracy in a country. Like we have the right to vote, universal adult franchise, elections, political parties. These are the institutions which will represent the democracy in a country. Thank you.